interesting things there. And before we went live, we were talking about there's a person, Matt Harney, who's a CEO of Cloud Ratings, which is kind of an aggregator of reports like Forrester and other reports. And he had mentioned he saw a statistic that 18% of pipeline in public companies were showing up as in ICP. Like the pipeline consisted of 18% ICP accounts. And he was really surprised by that. And my anecdote back was, well, actually, I think that's somewhat normal because a lot of companies don't look at that very carefully. But what I'm hearing you say is that number may even go further south. And the focus right now should probably be in the funnel as opposed to widening the funnel. Am I hearing you right on that? Or
so let's talk about that because I think there's a couple different dimensions, right? And so let's look at the whole market to begin with, right? Let's say I'm a HR software vendor and I've got a talent management solution, right? And so, question number one is, and we're targeting these market segments, and we can say, well, how many potential opportunities do I think exist for my talent management solution across these market segments and market accounts? And I could say maybe it's 100,000 potential opportunities, right? The bigger question is, of those 100,000 opportunities, how many of them are in either currently or going to be in market like in the next year, right? Not all 100,000 are going to be willing to buy. So I can stand there and go, hey, look at me, I've got this great solution, isn't it wonderful? And they may be tied up in contract, or they aren't in market, they're not looking at it. So some percent of that market is in market, and some percent, typically a bigger percent, is not in market. And so one of the big debates then is, okay, marketing, what are you supposed to do, right? Are you supposed to be focused on accounts that aren't in market and trying to bring them into market? Or do we focus on driving the best optimized experience with organizations that are currently in market today, right? And my answer is we ultimately have to do both, but we're doing it differently, right? And so one of the challenges, I don't think any organization is going to go from I'm not in market to being in market based off of a digital ad or an email or a call from an SDR, right? It's just not going to happen, right? And so us trying to drive demand programs into the universe that's not in market is just an inefficient, expensive approach, because I'm so dependent upon timing, right? The buy that client or that account has to be kind of at least aware and thinking about coming to market, and maybe I time my program and they'll come in market, but I don't want to be completely hidden from that market either. Some of these things like brand, right? And I'm gonna do brand and make sure that organizations are aware of us and we have a positive reputation and all that. But to me, the low hanging fruit is the companies that are in market today, right? And I'll come back to funnel conversion and efficiency, and if I think about like the relationship we have with organizations that are in market today, there's really three different types of relationships, right? Some of those companies that are in market, we have active cycles in. Our BDRs are talking to them, our salespeople are working the deal, so that's an active process, right? We also have what I consider kind of overlooked opportunities, right? And overlooked opportunities are, we got a signal that told us they're in market, and we ignored it, right? And if I look in my database, we have all kind of people who were named people that raised their hand and identified themselves that never made it to an MQL, right? And the question is why? Well, because our MQL was a single person and 100 points, and a lot of our database didn't reach that threshold. But what we missed was, a lot of our database missed that threshold, but there were some piece of our database where we had 2 or 3 people from the same account who engaged, and they didn't have 100 points individually, but it's 3 people from the same account interested in the same thing. And holy cow, that's actually dramatically higher propensity to buy. But we ignored them, right? Because we're waiting for this magical MQL. And then, kind of the third piece of companies that are in market is what I call hidden, right? And these organizations that are in market, they're out researching, for solutions like ours. We don't know them, we don't see them, and they don't know us, right? And so all three of those, the common thing is they're in market, right? And the other common thing is even the organizations where we're doing active cycles, where we're BDRs and the salespeople are talking to them, we're doing a horrible job from an efficiency perspective in actually winning the business, right? And so to me, right, yes, we need to do brand. We can't deny that, and hopefully that brand will attract people into market. But the low hanging fruit is let's just do a way better job at leveraging the companies that are currently in market. We don't have to convince them to come into market. We just have to convince them that we're the right solution. Let's focus there, right? And that is, I think, I call it the low hanging fruit, but I think that's the huge potential for organizations because, like I said, I don't have to convince them to come into the market. I just have to convince them we're the right one, right?
And Terry, I think you're raising some really important points. And you mentioned, the concept of revenue process transformation. And I really like that language. But anything with transformation in it means you need to convince people that there's a need to change and that what's on the other side of that change will be worth going through it. Yep. What are some of the ways you've seen marketing leaders or others inside companies get that buy-in for making the change?
Yeah. So I think the key, and there's probably two different paths we can go down on the answer, right? I think the first step is just engaging with them to even be considered part of the solution, right? And then helping them build the business case to drive justification on it, right? And so let's go first on just how do I get engaged in helping them sort of research and understand, is this something that I want to address, right? And so, like I said, if we think about the buying process as three phases, research is huge, right? And so one of the things we need to do to help support the research is engage with the buyer way earlier than we're doing now, right? And so, if I get like a third-party signal, a first-party signal, most of the time we're ignoring that today. Right. And that's a huge mistake because what I need to do is leverage those signals to say, hey, it looks like something's going on. They're telling me they're in market and I need to support and help that buyer in that research phase. Right. And my end goal then from a marketing perspective is not, I want to produce an MQL. Right. Because if I produce an MQL and send it to the BDR and the BDR tries to engage, the buyer, up until they finish their research, the buyer really doesn't want to have a sales conversation with vendors. They want to have an educational conversation with vendors for sure, but they don't want to have a sales conversation. And so what that means is we're really placing a lot more emphasis on marketing to help get that buyer through the research phase. And what that really means is the deliverable coming out of marketing is not an MQL, right? The deliverable coming out of marketing needs to essentially be a buying group who's done their research and understands the strategy of how to solve the problem. And we've actually made the short list of vendors that they're willing to talk to, right? And so that means, we have to embrace signals way earlier. We need to understand what that signal is telling us and then drive and act and engagement all around the buyer and the buying role and what their business needs are and how we can help them kind of understand, yes, this is something that you need to address and change, right? And then, yes, this is something that's going to add value to your business, right? I think the second sort of question then is, so that's a change, right? And that's a radical change. How do I justify or get organizations to move from buying groups to or at least the buying groups and do revenue process transformation? And one of the things that's really exciting, the difference, this summit was just completely different, right? We've been talking about buying groups and opportunities now for 7 years, right? And when we first started talking about it, people thought we were crazy, right? Then people are like, oh, I kind of get it. This year, so the sessions that were on revenue process transformation and buying groups, all that, were by far the most popular. We had intimate roundtable discussions was one of the things we offered.